Hey, everybody, it's Tommy Canelli, and welcome to Before the Lights podcast, the show that tells you how they made their mark. Today is Mob Talk Volume 2. It was so popular the first time, I decided to do it again. On this show, you're going to hear from author Shawn Levy, Ralph Deligatti, who worked at the Dunes, Peter Bronson, and author to talk about Mo Dalitz and the Kennedys, ATF Special Agent Lou Valoze, Chicago Outfit member Frank Calabrese Jr., the two Narcos, Steve Murphy and Javier Pena, along with Robert Mazur, who is the Infiltrator, and then in the Outlaw motorcycle gang section, Jay Dobyns and Steve Cook. So let's get this show started. We're going to kick it off with author out of Portland, Oregon, Shawn Levy, who's going to talk about Frank Sinatra, the mob, and the Sands. They had Vegas, they had money, they had the mob, they had politicians. What was the dark side?
Well, the dark side was they had Vegas, money, the mob, and politicians. I mean, Frank Sinatra introduced a woman named Judith Campbell. She was the ex-wife of a small-time actor, and she was kind of a mixed-up party girl. She was an attractive young woman. She looked a bit like Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. At the famous summit at the Sands, when the Rat Pack shot the movie Ocean's 11 and performed every night 2 shows on the stage of the Copa Room at the Sands, Frank introduced Judy Campbell, who he had been sleeping with, to Sam Giancana, the head of the Chicago mob, and John Kennedy, then running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency. And she carried on affairs with those two men simultaneously. Sinatra connected the mob to the Kennedys during the primaries in West Virginia, during the general election in Illinois. Mobsters wanted the Kennedy administration to stop the investigations into organized crime that had been going on during the Eisenhower years. In fact, the Kennedys ramped them up. Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General. Bobby didn't like Frank Sinatra. He thought Frank was a bad influence on his brother. Frank didn't like Bobby. He thought Bobby was a prig, even though he knew about Bobby's extramarital activities. There was just a lot of nasty stuff. You know, Frank and Dean Martin were part owners of the Sands. And they were said to own 8 or 10% of the hotel. It's almost certain that 90% of their ownership was actually covering up for gangsters in Kansas City and Chicago. I mean, there's no books, like no ledgers that show that, but it was a known thing. And when I was working on the book, the Sands was in its final days.
Oh,
so I stayed at the Sands Hotel for literally the last 10 days that it was open. And I was fortunate because the guy who had access to all the paper archives says, yeah, that stuff's all getting thrown out. So if there's anything you want, just go and look. So I could sit in the offices of the Sands and go through everything. I found people who had worked there. The Sands opened in 1954-ish, and it closed in 1996, 97. And I found people who had worked there for all 43 years. And they were going to lose their jobs. They had started working there, when they were 20 or something, and now they were in their mid-60s. And they, the hotel was going to be torn down. It's now the Venetian. One of the guys who'd worked there the entire time was a guy named Mike Cohn, whose brother Carl Cohn ran the Sands Casino and answered directly to mobsters back east. He told me all about his brother.
Moving on to former Dunes employee, Ralph Deligatti, who's going to talk about the casinos being mobbed up and an incident that is no question mob related. When you were involved at the Dunes, and we're not going to go through the whole story, we're just going to kind of hit on some points here. Did you know that casino was mobbed up when you got involved in it first off?
Well, all the casinos that I worked in from when I first got in town in '58 through the 70s were mob-run casinos.
Okay.
They were all connected somehow or another, whether they admitted it or not. But they were all mob-run casinos downtown and on the Strip.
Sure.
They were all associated one way or another. So of course I knew that they were. But this was especially the big boss. His name was Sid Wyman. I have a copy of a telegram was sent to Sid Wyman at the Flamingo. He was the casino manager of the original Flamingo that Bugsy Siegel built, and he worked there when it opened. And there's a copy of a telegram from Meyer Lansky to Sid Wyman telling him that Ben Siegel was killed last night. Close all the credit. Don't give away any more credit. Don't talk to the press until I get there tomorrow. You're giving him instructions as to what to do the day after Ben Siegel was killed. And Sid Wyman was running the place for Bugsy Siegel. And now when I go to work at the Dunes, he's running the Dunes.
When did you understand that there was skim happening?
Oh, well, it was known throughout Vegas. From the first day I went to work downtown Las Vegas in '58, the word was there was always talk about how the skim was going on the Strip in particular, and downtown too, because the mob was backing all these places. They built them, and that's why they built them. They built them to get the cash,
right?
Tax-free cash for all of their legal and illegal businesses that they were running from the big cities that they came from. That was just an easy way of picking up tax-free cash. And that's why they built the casinos. They had no idea that they were going to turn out to be as huge as they did, but you have to give them credit for knowing how to operate them. And that's what made Las Vegas. The way they knew how to run a casino is what made Vegas so popular. Corporations, they took over from there. Those were casinos. Now they're factories. When the mob took over, they became factories, not casinos.
There are some developments that happen. You end up having to let go one of the dealers. Things start to go south. Things are not going your way. And you come out one day and you realize you have a flat tire. But then when you open the trunk, what did you find?
Well, what happened is I walked out after having some conflict with some of the people that were involved with helping the owners skim off of the Baccarat pit. They went to the Baccarat pit to skim cash because the government stopped them from skimming in the counting room. So the only place they get their hands on cash was in the Baccarat pit. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of that going on. And I didn't know that until I walked into it. So I kind of, questioned it, and they objected to that because I was getting in the way of all the extra money they were making. So anyway, I wasn't going to get scared off because the money was really good, and I had 2 kids at home, 3 kids actually. So I walk out to the car, and I see my car had a flat tire. So I walked and I took a look, and it was very obviously slashed with a really sharp instrument, a knife or something. It wasn't just a nail. It was a slashed tire. So I called security. I went up to the valet desk and I called security. And the security guard named Jimmy, who I knew, came out. And I showed him, and I said, "You make a report about this, that my car's been slashed." And, and he said, "Okay." I said, "Come on, I'll help you change the tires." So I went and I opened the trunk. And as I went to reach into the trunk, I didn't hear anything, but I saw some movement, and I looked. And just as I was reaching in, I saw a sidewinder rattlesnake just coiling up, ready to take a shot at me. No noise, no rattle, nothing like that. Just coiling up, getting ready for me another inch or two, and he would have been on the end of my hand. So I pulled back, and Jim almost fainted. When I think about how shook he was about that. And of course, we slammed the trunk shut, and he ran in and called the police. And they came out and they said, we can't move the car. There might be a bomb in here too if they're out to get you this bad. So we had to wait for their bomb squad and all of that. And, so that was the beginning of quite an adventure.
Author Peter Bronson is going to speak about Mo Dalitz and his days with the Cleveland mob. And then we're going to connect some dots with JFK and Bobby Kennedy. The Cleveland 4 mob had moved into Newport, which was led by boss Mo Dalitz. And for my listeners that have heard all the other podcasts I've done that are mob related, probably know who Mo Dalitz is. For those of you that don't, Mo Dalitz basically became Mr. Las Vegas at one point in time, and Desert Inn started and had a big influence in Las Vegas, including building the Las Vegas Country Club. But Peter, what do you know about Mo Dalitz back in the day when he was with the Cleveland 4?
Well, he got his start in the Purple Gang in Detroit. He was not a hard luck guy. His family had a very successful laundry in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which basically had the contract for all the laundry at the University of Michigan, which would be very lucrative. So he didn't need to go into organized crime, but he did. And he was a very ruthless and tough mobster. He was the boss of the Cleveland 4, which included Lou Rothkopf, Morris Kleiman, and Sam Tucker as well, which are names that may have come up with you before. Mo was, he was a very dangerous guy, but very smart too. When other mobsters made the mistake of going into the Kefauver hearings unprepared, Mo made sure that he had an excuse so he didn't have to comply with the subpoena. And as he watched them make fools of themselves and embarrass themselves, he learned from that. So his appearance when he was on TV, he was very charming. He joked. He had the reporters laughing. He actually had them laughing at the expense of the Kefauver senators. But it was all part of his strategy to become what was later dubbed the Silent Syndicate. The Cleveland 4 was as powerful as Kansas City's mob or Miami's or any of the big ones, but it was quiet. It was always in the background. So when Mo went out to Vegas, as you mentioned, he went out there and Wilbur Clark was trying to finish the Desert Inn, but he was running into money troubles. And Mo started loaning him money and got his hooks in, basically then muscled him out and took over 83% of the Desert Inn. And that's when he started shifting operations out there. But he later said, everything I needed to know about doing the casino business in Las Vegas was what I learned at the Beverly Hills Country Club in Newport, in Southgate, Northern Kentucky. I think you probably know a lot about Bobby Kennedy's background. He was a ruthless enemy of Jimmy Hoffa.
Yep.
And he hated the mob, despite his own family's connections. And he decided this would be the place where he would go to war against the mob. And he chose Newport, Kentucky. And that was also their wire betting hub, one of the most lucrative regions in the country. And sure enough, he went to war on them. He sent one of his chief deputies with a blank check to prosecute these mobsters on behalf of George Radaman's civil rights. And they eventually prevailed.
So let me see if I can connect some dots here. Could it be said then that the attempted botched setup of Sheriff George Radaman connects to Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, who goes to war against the mob, and that could connect to have an effect for JFK's assassination?
Absolutely. This was one of those doors that shocked me. I did an FOI request, Freedom of Information Act, with the FBI files that are now declassified. And I obtained a lot of, 3 CDs packed with transcripts. And many of those transcripts of memos and FBI documents were wiretaps that Bobby Kennedy, illegally unconstitutional wiretaps of Mo's friends sitting at the Desert Inn plotting various mafia activities. And in these things, they're talking about trying to get even with the Kennedys. We have wiretaps of them talking about how these guys ought to be killed. There's a vendetta because Sam Giancana felt totally double-crossed. You know, it was legendary about Sam Giancana bragging about how he delivered the election to Jack Kennedy for Joe, his father, who was an old-time bootlegger. And so you have all these things. And then if you go even farther into the National Archives and you check out some of the documents that have been released, it's amazing what a whitewash to cover up the Warren Commission was. There were massive or very obvious and plain connections between Lee Harvey Oswald and organized crime. Of course, we know that there were organized crime connections with Jack Ruby. We also know that in some of these tapes that they had, Jimmy Hoffa even suggested that one of the Kennedys, they said Jack was probably the better target because if you kill Bobby, Jack's going to come after you with all the power of the president. So you cut off the head and the rest dies. Well, anyway, Jimmy Hoffa even was caught on tape and by informants saying that he wanted to kill one of the Kennedys with a sniper in an open car in a southern city.
ATF Special Agent Lou Valoze handling betrayal and an example when there was a sting of a member that was in the Chicago outfit. Undercover work's about befriend and betrayal, and you're going to take one's freedom. Do you ever get used to that, or do you just kind of go, this is my job and you're breaking the law, so I'm going to take you down?
Tommy, I was never totally comfortable with it. And I was never one of those guys. And there were guys who love that burn moment, that moment at the end when the bad guy finds out who you really are and that, he's going to prison for a long time. I dreaded that moment. That was just my personality. I didn't want to be around, and I would not be around if possible for that moment because, it's after a while you're developing a relationship and, everything you're telling this person is a lie, everything. You're meeting their family, you're meeting their friends, and you're building a relationship. You have to. And I don't care how bad they are or what they're doing. You're going to see a good part of them, right? Because everyone has a good, good father, whatever, good friend, whatever the trait may be. And then you're going to unravel that. You're going to pull that thread and unravel the whole thing at the end. And that is the ultimate betrayal. And because of your actions, they are going to be deprived of their freedom for a long time. So there's a humanity to this, to undercover work. And, if you don't feel that, there's something wrong with you. At least that's what my shrink told me. If you don't feel some kind of regret, you're not human. And I can just tell you a quick story. I went to Chicago to do actually a mafia infiltration combined with a biker infiltration. This guy was a patch member of the Outlaws motorcycle gang, and he was also a member of the mafia. In Chicago, they call it the outfit. And I was up there with him for a year, and we became very close. And this guy, he had already sniffed out three informants the FBI had sent to him, and two of them were they were dirty cops, and they were childhood friends of his. He was a super smart guy. He was not a convicted felon. They could not catch this guy. So after a year of spending a lot of time with this guy, they asked me to bring him to a hotel room where he thought he was meeting this MMA guy named Hoist Gracie, and when in fact he was meeting ATF and FBI agents who had put all the evidence in this hotel room, boxes and boxes of evidence against him to get him to flip. And I knew this guy wasn't going to flip. And I had to be there for that moment of betrayal. And when he wouldn't believe that I was who they told him I was, they asked me to walk into the room and show him my badge, which I did not want to do. I did not want to face him. But I did it. I walked in there. I showed him my badge, told him my real name. And I said to him, listen, I was just doing my job. It's not personal. And he looked at me and he goes, really? He goes, you're going to tell me it wasn't personal? He said, you met my kid. You spent time with my family. I let you in my circle. And you're going to tell me that this isn't personal? And I had no response. I had no response for that.
Keeping ties with that Chicago outfit theme, we now bring in former member Frank Calabrese Jr., turmoiled relationship with his father. The time that he put a gun to your face in a garage, did you think that was the end of it? He was going to pull the trigger on you?
yeah. So my dad, because he's seen that I didn't want to be around there no more, and I was going through a lot, it had to do after that money, the fact that, I'm paying him the money back. I got these restaurants. He says he owns everything. He owns me. And it started one night because I had my mother working at the restaurant. He didn't want her there, but she liked to be there. And I thought unconditional love. I'm getting this straightened out with my dad. Hopefully one day he's just going to, son, you're doing a good job. Let's be family again. I get a call one night. Come and meet me by the park. Let's go for coffee. We're hugging it out. You're doing a good job. I'm just like, this is good, Dad. This is great. We get in the car. We're going for coffee. We get in the same car. He's driving. He stops at a work garage. A work garage is where we keep illegal stuff, cars, guns, all that stuff. He goes, I got to run in for a minute. He goes, why don't you take a walk with me? I said, okay. I'm telling him a story. We're laughing. He's rubbing my neck. When I walked in there, I opened the door first. He comes in behind me and I hear the door slam and I turn around. He got me by the neck and he's got a gun in my face. And I could see the glassy eyes. And I just knew whenever my dad was crazy, I've been around crazy people, their eyes get glassy. And I thought, oh no, he set me up. See, I thought I was too smart to be set up. I know the game. I played the game. Well, it's always somebody close. It was my dad. He says, I can't control you. He goes, you're dangerous. He goes, I'd rather have you dead than you keep disobeying me. And all I thought about was my kids. I'm trying to get away from him. He's going to kill me, bury me somewhere. So I used trigger words. I was crying, Dad, Daddy, I'm your son. I've been doing everything. I'm trying to hug him and stay close. So it makes it hard and I won't break eye contact with him. And I got out of that garage. And don't ask me how, Tommy, because my dad always says you pull a gun on somebody, you better use it. It'll come back to haunt you. When we were in his truck driving back, I'm just sitting there tearing. I can't believe what just happened. I can't believe I'm out of the garage. I can't wait to get away from him because I want to live. And every once in a while, he backhand me to the face while I'm sitting in the truck. I didn't raise my hands. I just sat there and took it off. I went back and got that gun, and it was a .38 stump nose 5-shot revolver carried in my pocket every day. I said, he ever tries again, I'm going to kill him with the gun. He can kill him. That point, we pretty much did not get around each other anymore. I kept running from him until we got indicted in 95.
So when you go to prison, did you feel like it was better for you to be in prison than on the street with your dad?
I didn't want to be in prison or on the street with my dad. I knew what my dad was capable of, plus I feared him.
According to a recent CBS News poll, 54% of American families are affected by cancer. My story will touch you on how I survived colon and liver cancer. Now, I'm living a healthy lifestyle. I will inspire you to inspire others. Allow me to not only entertain, but leave you energized and driven to change your life and bring your organization working closer together. So open those minds and let me provide the tools to gain your greatest level of personal enrichment. For more information, go to TommyCanale.com. That's TommyCanale.com. And remember, you're one day away from changing your life. Click the link in the show notes. Okay, now we're going to move into Pablo Escobar. And let's hear from the two narcos themselves, Steve Murphy and Javier Pena, on the hunt for Escobar and how much corruption was actually happening. You guys live with a group of handpicked guys from the Colombian National Police. With so much corruption going on, how did you know you could trust them?
Yes. You know what? That's at the beginning, that was the problem, Tommy, that we had a group, but they were from Medellin. I would say about, 30% of the group was from Medellin. We did not know them. So all of a sudden we started seeing, man, our operation has been compromised. Pablo Escobar knows we're coming. So we started, we started realizing that Pablo Escobar, what he did, very ingenious, he got to these people's family members. We had about 5 guys higher level from Medellin. Then all of a sudden, Pablo went to the family and says, hey, if your kid doesn't call you to call me or call me directly if they're where they're coming, there's an operation on me and where they're going to hit me. If he doesn't tell you or tell me, I'm going to kill your kid, and then I'm going to go and kill you all. So that got back to the officer. So we had a lot of compromise at the beginning of operations being ruined, and we saw it firsthand. So all of a sudden, we strategized and said, guys, you know what? We just need to bring in people that are not from Medellin, and that's what helped. So we brought in handpicked people that Steve and I already knew in Bogota. There was a unit called the Dihin, which is a specialized, it's like their intel unit. So these guys were friends of ours. We worked with them. So we slowly started bringing them in, and you know what? The corruption stopped. There were no more phone calls to Pablo Escobar.
Gentlemen, was the goal to seize drugs in Colombia, or was it to kill Escobar?
That was, this is what was a little bit different for us, having worked in the United States. When we got down there, and especially once Escobar escaped from his custom-built prison, and then the next 18 months was that second manhunt, the Colombian National Police made it very plain to us. And we're living with these guys every day. We're living in Medellin with them on the police base. They say, guys, we're not in this to seize drugs. We're not in this to seize money. We're in this to capture and kill Pablo Escobar. And the reason was because he had killed over 1,000 police officers in Colombia. He had killed tens of thousands of innocent people with his indiscriminate car bombs and his assassinations and so forth. And they were just fed up. And you know what? I mean, after being with him and living with him and see what they went through, you can understand that. There was a funeral that Javier and I went to where 8 of our police friends were killed in one operation. And things like that, it brings a complete different picture in your mind and a complete different understanding of what's going on and why they think the way they do.
And if I can add to that, Pablo Escobar was personally targeting the police. He wanted to kill as many police officers as he could. During what we call the war on Colombia, created from Pablo Escobar, he put bounties on police officers. Can you imagine $100 a head for any sicario that would kill any police officer? Thousands, hundreds and thousands, and then the car bombs. So that's why the police, and you know what? We don't blame them. It was personal for them, like Steve said. It was a revenge because of all the police that Pablo was targeting, and then it got personal when he started targeting our main colonel. Was a guy by the name of Colonel Hugo Martinez, a real hero in Colombia. He was the boss of our search block. So all of a sudden, Pablo is targeting the colonel and his family, trying to kill his wife, his kids. So that's why it was personal. And that's why the police did not ever back down from Pablo Escobar because of all the police officers that he killed.
The infiltrator himself, Robert Mazur, on working with the Colombian cartel. Your operation led to over 100 indictments and a tab of over $500 million that was paid by the Colombian drug cartel. I know you didn't get directly to Pablo Escobar, but in a sense, Robert, were you basically working for Escobar then?
Oh, absolutely. I met in Paris for several days with some very high-level people within the cartel, one of whom is a lawyer, he is a lawyer, still alive, by the name of Santiago Uribe. Santiago was the consigliere, the principal lawyer and counselor of Pablo Escobar. And other people in the room dealt directly with Escobar. One guy was in charge of acquiring the Medellin cartel's Air Force. He was a former commercial 747 pilot. And he was a very, very trusted guy who was a German Colombian whose father had migrated to Colombia after World War II. And he spoke German, English, Spanish, and a couple of other languages. And he was so trusted and he spoke English so well that he was designated by Gerardo Moncada, my main client. Gerardo Moncada was the principal manager for Pablo Escobar. For those of you, and I know your listeners have had the privilege of listening to Steve Murphy and Javier Pena, the two people most responsible for what ultimately led to the demise of Pablo Escobar. And the Gerardo Moncada was the guy who managed 60% of Pablo Escobar's routes. The other guy was Fernando Galeano, who managed 40%. Those were my two principal clients. And for those of you that see Narcos, last two episodes of the first year focuses on Gerardo Moncada and Fernando Galeano in their role. And ultimately, they made some big mistakes and put themselves in a position where Escobar thought that they were stealing proceeds that should have been shared with others in the cartel. And that led to them being summoned to the cathedral, the self-made jail of Escobar, where they were, by the accounts of one credible person who was there, hung by their feet. Their clothes were stripped off. Blowtorches were used to melt the skin off their bodies. Then they were chopped up in smaller pieces and then burned into ash. And nobody's ever seen them again. He then went after their siblings and their co-workers in the Moncada and Galeano branches of the Medellin cartel. And that started the internal cleansing by Escobar that led to those who survived becoming part of Los Pepes, the vigilante group that worked with the Cali cartel, and certainly some good reason to believe the Colombian National Police and others to track down and ultimately see Pablo Escobar killed.
In this last segment, we're going to hear from two guys to talk about outlaw motorcycle gangs. First up is Jay Dobyns, who speaks about his undercover operatives in outlaw motorcycle gangs. And then we're going to end it with Steve Cook to give you a better explanation on the drugs in outlaw motorcycle gangs and then on their patches. What was the final tipping point to end the operation? And what was your feelings when you were told it's over?
Well, the final tipping point was, when I had felt like we had really reached our objective and had, thoroughly infiltrated the gang. It was at the same point that the leadership of my agency had decided they'd had enough. We'd been around in this tornado of violence for 2 years. And then, what I believed was this clever infiltration technique to fake this homicide was actually kind of the tipping point. I think it was just too much for my leadership to absorb. When they decided to call the case off, I fought very aggressively, very passionately to keep going. I felt like we'd put ourselves in position to do the most damage as investigators. And now they were going to, pull the rug out from underneath it. So I was disappointed. I was upset about it, to say the least. In hindsight, now looking back at it, 20 years later, it was a blessing. The people that were running things understood better than I did that it was time to get out.
How did the murder of Cynthia Garcia play into all this infiltration you were doing?
Well, it was huge. It goes back to the Laughlin River riot. Within that same time frame, Cynthia Garcia, a mother with a bunch of kids, ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And she was at the Mesa Hells Angels clubhouse, which is where I spent the majority of my time during that investigation. One thing led to another there, and she was beaten, boot stomped to the ground. They rolled her up in a piece of carpeting and stuffed her in the trunk of a car. They drove her out to the desert outside of Mesa, outside of Phoenix, Arizona, to a town called Apache Junction, and in the cover of darkness, they finished the murder. They stabbed her multiple times and actually tried to cut her head off.
Were you able to then in the indictments finger the people that had done that?
Yeah, the people that were responsible for Cynthia's murder were charged, indicted, prosecuted. I testified against them from what I had learned and what I knew during the investigation. And they pled guilty to the murder charges. There wasn't any hiding from it. We had proven the case. We knew what they did and how they did it. Not necessarily why they did it. The why is always the question. Like how do things get so bad that you take a woman who can't defend herself, beat her to death, and then take her out in the desert and cut her head off? The why is oftentimes a mystery.
And here's Steve Cook.
So the run bag theory, particular group that we investigated, the El Forastero and the Galloping Goose. So what they were doing is they had a series of runs that they were required to go on every year as part of their membership in the organization. And it was like a New Year's party. They had Mardi Gras, they had All Charter, Memorial Day, Labor Day, Halloween. There was a gypsy run that they participated in. So because they knew that they were always under law enforcement scrutiny, they decided that it would be smart if, instead of everybody carrying their individual drugs to the run with them, if the drugs were already there when you got there. So the determination they made is, for example, if Kansas City, where I'm located, if they were going to host the run, the 4th of July run, then what would happen is that every other charter, each member would have to pay $40. I believe 4th of July was maybe $70. It was a little bit more expensive, but on average, it was like $40 per member and per associate that attended, like an old lady or a friend of the club. So they paid this money to their treasurer. Their treasurer converted that to a postal money order, and he would send it to Kansas City, as would all the other charters. Once Kansas City got all that money, they would go out, they would buy food, they would buy alcohol, and they would buy drugs. They'd buy methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana. So what would happen is they would take the drugs and they would have prospects roll the marijuana into what they called run joints. And I mean, they're rolling, hundreds of these things sitting in a little pop-up tent. And then they would take the meth and cocaine and they would weigh it out and put it into bags, and they would call that a run bag. So what would happen is when the other members would show up, they would say, "Hey, who's got the run bag?" And they'd say, "Okay, well, it's one of the Kansas City members." So they'd go find a Kansas City member who had the run bag, and they could go get their drugs, go get high, party, and do all that. So in theory, they thought they were being really smart, like, hey, this is a good way to not get caught. What they didn't factor in is the fact that that's still distribution of a controlled substance. And when you do it 7 times a year and you're buying multiple ounces of drugs, you really quick get over that 500 gram federal threshold of, where it becomes a mandatory minimum sentencing guideline. So yeah, it was, I guess a good strategy in theory, but, ultimately didn't work out real well for a lot of them.
What has meth done in general to these outlaw motorcycle gangs?
Ruined them. I actually have a associate that's a former bandito. He was actually an officer in the Banditos, been a pretty close friend of mine for well over a decade now. And if he's told me once, he's told me a dozen times, methamphetamine was the downfall of his club and of all the clubs. Too much irrational behavior, irrational thought process. And he said nothing good came out of it. He said, if anything, obviously these groups were always going to be involved in crime, but once these guys started using at the level that they were using, he said everything just kind of fell apart.
explain to our listeners, to go into a bunch, but maybe just a couple, patches and their meanings.
Sure. So every group's got their own little nuances, if you will, their own little, slogans and sayings and T-shirts and patches that a member might wear that they might earn. Just a few examples, like, with the Sons of Silence, they wear a BBB patch. That means Brothers Behind Bars. So it's kind of their way of supporting those members who have been incarcerated. The Bandidos have a patch that says, "Expect no mercy." And a member is awarded that patch for taking blood or giving blood on behalf of the gang. So basically getting involved in some kind of violent, confrontation. The Hells Angels have a patch that says "Filthy Few" on it. And the Filthy Few patch is supposed to be awarded to a member who has committed a murder on behalf of the gang. Another one that the Hells Angels have says "Dequelo" on it. And the Dequelo patch basically means "give no quarter." I think it was something maybe from the Alamo. And you get that patch for violent resistance or assault on a law enforcement officer. So there's a variety of different things that these individual groups have. I referenced the Galloping Goose and El Forsteros. They have a DFFL patch, "Drugs Forever, Forever Loaded." And they get that patch if one of them gets popped on a drug arrest. It's kind of a badge of honor. So there's so many. You could go down a complete rabbit hole on the amount of different patches that these different groups have.
I want to thank all those that made Mob Talk 2 possible. Shawn Levy, Ralph Deligatti, Peter Bronson, Lou Valoze, Frank Calabrese Jr., Steve Murphy, Javier Pena, Robert Mazur, Jay Dobyns, and Steve Cook. That's going to do it for this episode of Before the Lights. But before we go, people, make sure you go to beforethelightspod.com/shop. That's beforethelightspod.com/shop. And make sure you get those bundles. Those former Extra 5 are broken down into sports, music, food, drink, entertainment, and you can purchase them and own the bundle. So get your butt over there and do that, or click a link in the show notes. Follow me on Instagram at Before the Lights Podcast. And thank you for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, I salute a chin chin.